You're listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast with Jody Livingston, episode number 6. Cue the music.
Welcome to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, helping you survive and thrive in youth ministry. And now your host, Jody Livingston.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks for listening today and tuning in to the podcast, wherever you are and wherever this finds you. I always appreciate you listening. If this is your very first time listening, then welcome. Thanks for coming. And if you're coming back, thanks for coming back. If you're enjoying the podcast, man, I would love for you to head over to iTunes and Stitcher, leave a review there and subscribe. You can find that on iTunes by going to thelongerhaul.com/iTunes. That'll take you right there. Just helps me move up in the rankings there a little bit. It helps other youth pastors, youth workers find the podcast and get a little more help, hopefully, there. As always, extra resources, plenty of stuff for you at thelongerhaul.com. The show notes from today's episode will be there at thelongerhaul.com/episode 006. You can follow me on Twitter at Jody Livingston, and of course on Facebook. Again, all the links and resources mentioned today will be on those show notes. Man, I am stoked for you to listen to the episode today. It is packed full of great content. So if you're driving in the car listening to this or out for a run, you're going to want to go back and listen to this again with a notepad near you. Nate Turner is a guest today on the show. Nate is a youth pastor, phenomenal youth pastor that I've known for several years now. Also has a ministry or a business on the side that he does where he helps youth ministries craft vision. And he's going to kind of walk through that process with us today. And then you're going to want to stick around, especially at the end of the podcast. Nate's going to offer up something real special for the listeners, and he's going to tell you how to do that at the end. So great episode. Super excited today. Make sure you stick around for the end. And with that said, we'll jump right into the interview. All right, I'm here with Nate Turner. Man, Nate's a great guy, good friend of mine, youth pastor, great youth pastor with just a solid ministry, doing some really good things in that, as well as just a great guy when it comes to crafting vision, helping others find and create just strategy for how to be more effective in that. So welcome, Nate. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jody, for having me.
So Nate, for those who are listening who don't know you, why don't you take just a few minutes and introduce yourself, kind of tell us a little bit about who you are.
Sure. I love students and I love student ministry. In fact, I've been doing it for almost 2 decades now, pushing that way, and really enjoy the process of helping students move from where they are to where they want to be, and ultimately from where they are to where God wants them to be. And so that's been part of my journey. My wife and I have been married for almost 12 years. We've got 2 kids, one we adopted over the last few months. And so we're trying to get some sleep at the house, but we are enjoying it right now. And I love strategy. When I was in seminary, I did my Master's of Theology at Dallas Theological Seminary. And while I was there, I got to take a class on strategy. And for some reason, when I was in that class, it really kind of pushed me to start thinking strategically. And I did a lot of my study in leadership and leadership development. And so as I was growing in leadership development, I learned this strategic planning process. And as I did, it was just something that I became passionate about. And I remember a few years back, I was looking at our student ministry and kind of trying to wrap my head around, okay, what does it look like for us to be strategic in what we're doing? And I was sitting on the couch almost every night watching TV. And one night I just felt like, you know what, this isn't where I want to be. I want to do what I'm passionate about. I want to find some stuff that I'm passionate about and do that instead of sitting in the couch watching TV every night. And so I began to create the Creative Grid planning process, which is something that I do kind of on the side. It's something that I have grown in and really taken a few groups through and teaching them how to be more strategic. I went through the same process with my student ministry here, and we really built a strategic plan around, okay, where do we want to go? Who do we want to be? And how are we going to get there?
Yeah. And I think that's so important for so many well, any ministry really, but a lot of youth pastors. I mean, I think back when I was starting out in youth ministry, I had no clue what I was doing. I was just making, I was just making stuff up, and
we just show up and hang out with kids, right?
Yeah, that's what I was hired to do. But there was, at the same time, there was this desire in me, because especially as a really young guy, to do more and to push these students to accomplish more and to see God do these tremendous things. And it was a very, very, I mean, I had 5 kids. If everybody came and brought a friend, there was nobody there, but you just felt like, okay, man, God can really get a hold of these kids and do something amazing. I just don't know how to bring that about. And I was reading every book I could find, which were not really that helpful, to be honest, at the time. And, you just kind of struggle to kind of get your feet under you and feel, okay, this is the direction, or this is a direction to go. And eventually you kind of stumble into that if you stay with it long enough. But having something off the front, someone to go to kind of help you articulate that and get you pointed in a direction is so, so important.
It's really interesting that we do student ministry for a long time, and we get in a rut of doing the same thing over and over and over again. And really, we don't ever think about what we're doing from a big picture standpoint.
Right.
And when it comes to strategy, when it comes to developing mission, vision, values, strategies, and goals, when it comes to those type of things, a lot of times we tend to not want to do those because we over-spiritualize the process, and we think that it's not spiritual to do planning.
Yes.
And a lot of youth pastors think that way. And the truth is, if we allow God into the middle of our planning process, then we are going to have a spiritual plan.
Yes. So let me ask you this. How early in the process should a youth pastor sit down and start planning? I mean, like, you're hired today. Are you able, week 1, to legitimately sit down and start planning those things out? Or is there a time, like how far out do you have to be?
I think you can start immediately if you want to, but I don't think you can sit down and develop the whole thing immediately. In fact, for me, I think it's a team that needs to be doing the planning. I don't think it's just one guy. I think that the days of, I'm going to go to the mountain and come back with a vision and we're going to go do it, I think those days may be over in some ways in ministry. And I think a lot of youth pastors live there for a long time. I'm going to go get the vision and come back. And then when they burned out and when they felt broken or tired, there was no vision.
Yeah.
And a lot of youth ministries floundered in that. And so I would say that it's not that you need to go do it the first day. I think that there are probably some holes in your ministry if you start week 1. There are probably some holes you need to fill before you can really kind of jump in there. Mark DeVries, in his book, Sustainable Youth Ministry, talks about youth ministry as a plane that we are flying and building at the same time. And I really think that's true. I think a lot of times you got to do a little building on the plane before you can really decide where it is exactly you are taking this plane.
Yeah, I agree with that. When I came on staff here, where I am now, we sat down with our whole team, and we had a pretty good team when I got here. Just like you said, not a lot of direction really. And I had in mind, okay, here are a few characteristics that we need to build within our students. I've written about that before on the blog, but here are 5, 6 characteristics we want to build into our students. And so what I did then is I brought the whole team in with a big whiteboard, and I said, okay, I want you to list out the characteristics that you want to see in our students when they graduate. And so we just made a list, and there was a lot of things on that board, right? I mean, there was a lot of things, and some could be grouped underneath others, but there was a lot of things. And I said, okay, let's narrow this and begin to, because we can't accomplish 50 things well, but we can accomplish 5 or 6, and most of these things fall underneath one another. And so that's what we did. We narrowed down to those 5 or 6 things, and they just happened to be the same things that I had before I came into that meeting. And that's not that hard to do. It wasn't that I manipulated that. It's just we all want the same things for our students. Mm-hmm. And so that got everybody on the same page literally from week 1. Mm-hmm. And then we crafted from there.
I think it depends on the situation. I think if you walk into a good situation, you've got some really good, strong leaders. I think that's definitely something that you can step into almost immediately. I think you almost have to decide who's going to be on my team going over the next year and a half. Who's going to stick around? Who's not going to stick around? And when you decide who that team is that's going to be surrounding you doing ministry, then you bring those people together and you can build a plan for where you're going to go over the next 2 years. I think you have to be a little careful because a lot of times we overestimate our abilities. We say we can do this in 6 months, but really the truth is you're not going to do that for another year or two, maybe even 3.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something else for me, my own ministry, and just a discipline I think that I set a long time ago is I just started goal setting, right? Where do I want to be in 6 months? Where do I want us to be in 6 months, a year, 3 years, and 5? And I really start at 5 and then realistically work back. Because, I think if you don't have that long-term end in mind, you can't really set realistic short-term goals.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is for me, goal setting is the last phase of the process.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the process, because I know you've got a process that you walk guys through.
Sure.
Or I guess not just guys, but youth pastors.
I walk youth pastors and also really youth pastors in a select group of their teams. I usually ask them to pick about 5 to 7 people to bring into a room. I try to get an odd number so that then if you have to come down to it and say, okay, let's just kind of take a straw poll on this and see where we're at. Usually it ends up with one side being the winner. I try not to get above 8 just because then you get so many voices in the room, it's hard to actually hear where you're going. But we start out with mission. And a lot of people, they want to craft an amazing mission statement. And I think that's a great idea. I try to make sure that our teams come in and they craft a great mission statement. But I don't think a mission statement is the end all be all. We all have the same mission. At the end of the day, we all have the same mission. It is the Great Commission. We have to go and make disciples of the world. That's our mission. And so every mission statement for every student ministry should in some way encapsulate the Great Commission.
Yes.
And specifically the Great Commission with students.
I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes when it comes to vision. I think a lot of guys, I say guys, y'all know what I mean. Like I'm just using that as a generic term, but a lot of ministries, people, businesses even, but especially youth ministries, confuse mission and vision.
Oh, always.
And is there a difference?
Absolutely, there's a difference. And really what's hard about this is that sometimes in business and in a corporate culture, mission and vision have been flip-flopped a little bit. And so some businesses talk about vision as though it's mission and talk about mission as though it's vision. Or they'll have this long mission statement that is actually more of a strategy than it is a mission statement. So when we get down to what we talk about with strategy, a lot of mission statements really aren't mission statements per se. They're strategy statements. They talk about what we're going to do exactly instead of talking about the big picture. And mission is ultimately the big picture of, if you were to take a 30,000-foot view of what it is, why we exist. For us here at our church, our mission statement is we're taking a real Savior to real students. Yeah. That's what we do. And it's a 30,000-foot view. It's not very specific. At the end of the day, if you were to ask, okay, how? That's strategy.
Right.
And most people want to jump directly from mission to strategy. They want to go, we exist to take a real Savior to real students. Okay, how do we do that? Well, here are the 3 things we're going to do. But I think that vision is so important that you've got to create it first. Before you start talking about strategy, you've got to create vision first. And here's the difference between mission and vision. Mission is that statement of why we exist. It's that 30,000-foot statement of why we exist. Vision is a picture of what it looks like if you were to accomplish that mission. So if you were to look around your student ministry and we're taking a real Savior to real students and we're fully accomplishing that, what does that look like? And we want to paint a picture that's so clear and compelling and inspirational that people want to go after that picture, and that ultimately is vision.
That's good. That's good. So start with mission, and then from there, where?
Well, from there we go. Actually, it's funny because we don't even jump straight to vision, because Peter Drucker, business guru, he has a statement that I think works as well in churches as it would in any single business. And if you look around your church, you're going to find that it's true. He says that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the culture of your church is going to determine what that picture, what vision you accomplish. And the culture that you're creating around your student ministry is either going to help you get towards your mission or it's going to kill your mission.
So mission to
values. Because values end up creating culture. It's the values that you own as part of your student ministry that are going to create your culture. The ultimate way that we create culture is by creating values. The values that we hold as a ministry, they are going to create the culture around us. And when it comes down to it, there are a couple of values even in our student ministry here that we've kind of tried to embrace that have really changed a lot of things. One specifically is we say this. We say be awkward. And what we mean by that is be awkward so that others don't have to be. It's kind of a value statement that we have. And what we mean by that is that when somebody new walks in the door, we as students in our ministry and as adult leaders and me as the student pastor, we have to do the really awkward thing of walking over to them and introducing ourselves and bringing them into our group. And that's really awkward for us. But if we think about it, it's more awkward for them to walk into a room, not know anybody, and have to try to break into one of our circles.
Yes, and we've talked about that before. I love that.
And I stole that. I mean, let's be honest. I stole that from Mark DeVries in his book, Sustainable Youth Ministry. It was just a really brief snippet in his book, but I stole it because I thought, man, that is amazing. And, the truth is for all of us in student ministry, we're all stealing something from somewhere. Pretty much everything we do comes from what somebody else did somewhere. We pick and choose the parts that are just amazing and will work in our context. And it has worked in our context. But we're creating vision around that value.
Yes.
So if you were to say, well, okay, well then what's the vision with that? The vision with that is that, we want to create a student ministry where people walk in the doors for the first time, and when they walk back out, they cannot wait to step through those doors again.
Right. Now, let me ask you this: so you go mission to values. Is there a number? How many values really are sustainable?
I usually try to keep that number to around 8.
Okay, so no more than 8.
Yeah, I try to keep it. I actually try to keep it around 7, maybe even 6 if possible. Because if you create about 6 values, 4 or 5 of them are going to be actual values. They're going to be things that you actually value as an organization and a ministry. They're going to be things that you do naturally. It's going to be part of who you are, and they're going to lead toward accomplishing the mission. Those are the kind of things that it's just part of your organization, and you don't even have to really worry about trying to create it as a value. You're just more naming it, and you're creating vision around it. You're creating a picture, an inspirational picture for people about where you want to be at the end of the day with that value. That's ultimately what vision is going to be. And then usually I reserve 2 spots in the values list for what we call aspirational values. They're values that don't exist yet in your organization, but you really, really, really want them to.
Okay, so you've got your mission. Everybody's going to, they may not be able to articulate it, but they understand it, okay? Then you've got your values. How do you communicate the values separately then from the vision once you get to that point? Or does that kind of go unsaid?
I think values are underlying, and you teach toward those values, or you can teach toward the vision.
Right.
They can either be spoken or unspoken.
Gotcha.
I think values help people to be inspired, vision helps people to be inspired to live out the values.
Which leads back to the mission.
Ultimately, at the end of the day.
So, mission to values, and then how do you go from values to vision?
Okay, this is the really hard part. I'm going to be really honest. This is probably the hardest part of strategic planning. And because most people who like strategic planning are your engineer, linear-minded folks, and vision requires somebody who has that artistic mindset, who's kind of a writer, a novelist, that kind of person, somebody who really likes to create pictures and word pictures. So vision is really, I think, one of the hardest pieces of the process because you're trying to take linear concepts and turn them into beautiful pictures.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to think forward. You've got to be able to look into the future and say, okay, in 5 years, 10 years even in our student ministry, if we're accomplishing the value, if this value is fully lived out, this value of being awkward so that others don't have to be, what does that look like?
So for the listener who's listening to this and going, oh man, that is not me. I am not artistic. My strength is not in vision, crafting, or casting. where would you encourage them to look? Or how can they accomplish that if that's not their strength?
Someone needs to be on your planning team. Somebody needs to be in your corner who's a picture person. So look around. And what's funny is if you're not that kind of person and you really don't like that sort of thing, typically the kind of person, that person that is going to help you create vision is going to be the kind of person that drives you crazy.
Right, right.
And the same thing is true on the other end. If you're really good at casting vision and creating vision, the kind of person you're going to need to create a good strategic plan, a good solid linear process is going to be the kind of person that drives you crazy. So at the end of the day, you're going to need to look around and you're going to say, you know, who really thinks differently than me? Who's good at forward thinking? And they may be the person that's always talking about inspirational type of things. They may be the person that sends you forwards of that sort of stuff, which would make me crazy, but I mean, they may be the right person for you. But really you need that person who thinks in terms of pictures. And so begin to look around you and to think, okay, who's the inspirational person? Who's telling great stories? Who tells great stories in your ministry?
Yeah, that's good.
And find that type of person because you need somebody who can tell a really good story.
So for the youth pastor who may be listening who's volunteer or they're bivocational, you know, and their ministry, you know, they've got 5-10 kids. Is this an essential process for them?
Absolutely.
I mean, does that look different for them in their context than it would, say, a ministry running, you know, 100, 200 or more?
This is going to sound really crazy, but I almost think it's easier to shift a culture with less people.
No, I would agree with that.
And so what you're ultimately trying to do is to shape a culture that's going toward a mission, I think that at the end of the day, it's going to be a little easier. Now, I mean, granted, I know, you know, I think we've all been there where we're doing ministry with 5-10 kids and you look around and you go, yeah, I can change one of these kids, right. You know, and you look around and you go, yeah, the other 4, you know, 2 of them are here because their parents are forcing them to come. The other 2 are mostly apathetic. And I got the one kid who is really, really after it. And the truth is you're living the same thing that every single pastor and student pastor is living out in the country, around the country, which is you've got the 20-60-20 rule. You've got the 20% of your kids that are going after it with everything they've got. You got the 60% that are, yeah, maybe not. Yeah. And then you've got the 20% of your kids that are just, I mean, they're the other way. And so I think it's just as important for that person to know where they want to get to. Because if really you just say, at the end of the day, I'm just here to hang out with kids and I'm just a volunteer. If we take that I'm just a volunteer mentality and we walk in the doors with, well, I'm just a volunteer, our kids are going to sense that. Our students are going to sense that. Our leaders are going to sense that. The parents are going to sense that. And at the end of the day, nobody's going to be excited about where they're going because, I'm just a volunteer. This really isn't that important. But if you say this is so important that we need to know where we're going to go and where we're going to get to, other people are going to sense that. They're going to experience that. And they're going to want to go after that too, even if it's only your one kid. Right.
And so in that context, because I want to step into that for a minute. Cause,
sure.
So, I've been in 15 years, whatever. I've only served at 3 churches, and one of those for a very significant amount of time, relatively speaking, to youth ministry world. All 3 have been varying sizes. So, whether it was 5 kids in that first church, the second church I served at, there were no kids when I started, right? So 8 years later, we left. We had about probably 45 there.
Okay. That's unreal.
And so now, now I'm in a ministry that's significantly larger. We get a few hundred kids. What you're saying, is so true because it's just the percentages that have changed. Where at maybe that first church I served at, I had the one kid who really got it. And I don't even have to. I know exactly who. I can think of him now. Progressively, those same issues have been in place. It's just, everybody wants a larger ministry. Everybody wants a larger ministry, but the reality is, the bigger the ministry, the bigger the problems. It's the same problems; they're just magnified. So the same struggles and issues that you're having, at a ministry with 5 kids, is the same that you're going to have if you're a ministry of 500 kids It's just on a greater scale. Within that, let me say, you're talking about 7 or 8 people, or an odd number. So 7 people, getting 7 people together in a room, right? To vision cast, to craft. Mm-hmm. If I'm in a small church volunteering, I mean, you could find 2 people, right? And 3 of you could come together and do this. That's realistic.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so it's not, everybody wants to be part of a larger ministry. Those problems just scale up. You're not really at as much of an advantage as it would seem, because I don't care what size ministry you're in. There's never enough money. There's never enough volunteers. There's never enough space. There's never enough time. There's never enough resources. It literally scales. So the problems don't change.
And I really think I think God does that to us on purpose. I really do. I think that he does that to us on purpose so that we always feel a little bit desperate for him. We always feel a little bit as though we never feel comfortable where we are, because we always know that we need him, because we need more than we actually have. Yeah. I think that's really true at the end of the day when it comes down to that. And that's what, I mean, at the end of the strategic planning process, that's what we come down to most of the time, is that if this is going to work, yeah, this is a great process and it looks good on paper, but if it's going to work, God has to show up somewhere in the middle of all this, because we really just can't make it happen.
Yeah. And it has to scale from the start. You have to think in the terms of whatever we set, the values, the goals, all of this, the vision, it has to scale up if the ministry grows. And I think too, yes. I'll say this too. I think there is this myth that everything grows that's out there. I think Larry Osborne talks about this. There's, everybody, all living things grow. And so if your ministry is alive and thriving, it should be growing. And I don't think that's true. I think if you step back, things grow for a period and then they stop. If I continue,
winter always comes, right?
If I continue to grow, there's something wrong with me, And so unless you are somehow enhancing that growth outside of the natural order or way, it's not going to do that. So you're not going to, if you have a church that's running 200 as a whole, and you've got 100 students coming, that's not a healthy situation.
There's something desperately wrong at that point.
Yeah, that is not a healthy situation. So
right.
Right. But we all want to grow our ministries, but you can't. So let me ask this along that line. When we talk about mission, vision, values, that kind of thing, what part does the overall vision of the church as a whole play in you crafting a vision for your ministry?
Well, I think that if the church has an overall vision, which, if we're being really honest, that's not a huge majority of the churches. Most of them don't really have a clear, communicated, inspirational picture of where they're going to be going. But if the church does have an inspirational, clear vision, then at the end of the day, you as a student ministry are coming back around and you're saying, okay, where could we align with that vision even in our student ministry?
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is something, if your church has a clear vision, this needs to be on your radar. Because if your church is the kind of church that creates a clear vision, then you need to be, as a student pastor, aware of that. And also in the process of trying to say, okay, how do we align with their vision and create our own vision so that we know where we're going, because that's the kind of church you're a part of.
I think a lot of guys get fired or quit and leave frustrated because they fail to recognize that. They come in and they set the direction of a student ministry in a direction that is not in line with where the church as a whole is going. And in the end, I mean, that's you can see that conflict coming from.
Yeah, a long time ago, one of my first jobs out of college in student ministry was with a church. It's a big mainline denominational church. And the truth was, if you looked at it, and I mean, I figured it out about a little ways in, if you looked at the church and the direction the church was going as a whole, and you sat in a Sunday morning service, and you sat in our student ministry, they were polar opposites. That's not healthy for a church. It's not healthy for a youth group. And
it's really common.
It's terribly common. But at the end of the day, for me, there was a personal decision that had to be made. And I had to say, okay, I can either work here and know that I'm going to be trying to take a ministry in a different direction than the church, or I can say, you know what, the wisdom here says that it's wise for me at this point in time. And I really felt like God was moving in the middle of that too. I don't think it was just common sense. but it was also God in the middle of the process showing me there's a place where you're going to be moving toward the same vision. Now, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be a perfect alignment. I think any guy who's out there or any lady who's out there doing student ministry and they're trying to find the perfect place, I don't think that's going to happen.
Right.
But I think they have to find a place where they can align with the vision of the church and where they're heading. I mean, that's for sure. And if your church doesn't have a vision, they don't have a clear vision, then by all means make one.
Yeah.
Create one.
Yeah.
Don't go against don't purposefully go against the direction of the church. I mean, the church probably already has a direction. They just may not say it out loud. But by all means, be the one, you be the person who's going to step out there and say, well, here's a picture of where we're going.
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful in that process. If you're in this situation where the church doesn't necessarily have a strong vision or direction, that you don't build something. Maybe they're not articulating it, but you can clearly see the direction and the aim and the goals of the church.
Yes.
There is an extent where, yes, the student ministry can largely shape and help corral that to an extent. However, if you create a very dynamic ministry that's heading in a different direction, whether the vision is articulated or not, you are not helping your students because they're going to leave your ministry and all they know is what you've given them. You've not set them up to successfully transition into church as a whole, right? And so, man, I just see a lot of guys mess that up.
And to look at it the other way, because that's one of the common mistakes. If you look at it the other way, if you create a clear vision that is along the same lines of where the church is going, even if they haven't articulated it, people are going to be passionate about that.
Yes.
And the rest of the church is going to be excited about that because what you're creating is only making your church and the experience of your church and the life and the body of Christ there better.
And it helps in every, like, I do a course, here on through the Longer Haul occasionally. It's not open all the time, but I'll open it up periodically on building the all-star team. Just how do you build a solid, good team around you, okay? Because that is a big weakness in ministry.
Right.
We just kind of take whoever we can get. We plead from the pulpit, and we get the wackos
Right.
and the weirdos.
The answer to that is blood, sweat, and tears, right?
It's hard work, and it's vision, right? 99% of youth pastors that I know, churches, but we'll speak to youth pastors, recruit on need and not on vision. And that is a big problem. That's plugging holes in a sinking ship versus raising the sails. And you just cannot succeed over the longer haul with that. I mean, no, that's whatever, not trying to be whatever. I'm just saying you can't succeed for, a sustainable ministry without the right people on board. And you can't get the right people on board if you're not steering them towards a vision.
Absolutely.
So, okay,
Absolutely.
so mission, values, vision, and then what?
Then we get to the how. So what is it that we do? And I like to talk about this whole process as a roadmap. If mission is kind of the 30,000-foot view, if it's kind of the satellite view of a map, and values are kind of the compass that help guide us, and if vision is the destination we're trying to get to, then strategy at the end of the day, strategy is the route that we're going to take. So if you were talking about how are you going to get to grandma's house, and you've got to go over you got to go over the river and through the woods, right, to get to grandma's house. And so that's the direction you're going to go. And so you might, if you're leaving from your house to go to your parents' house, you might know I'm going to need to take this road this far, and I'm going to take this highway that far, and then I'm going to take a left onto this street, and then I'm going to turn right into their house. And that route, that overall route, is kind of how you get from where you are to where you want to be. And I think the same thing is true in our student ministry. You got to determine, okay, how are we going to get from where we are to where we want to be? Now, our church here, we have a defined strategy. We're one of those churches that already develops that sort of thing. So the defined strategy for us is invest, connect, grow, and serve. So that's what when our strategic planning team went through it, we said, listen, this is what the church says. Is that what we want to adopt? And we said, absolutely. Right. So for us, it was a little easier in creating strategy. I've had other churches that came up with other acronyms to really express that. But really, at the end of the day, you're going to talk a little bit about worship. You're going to talk about a little bit about connection with others, connection with God. You're going to talk about growth. You're going to talk about serving. You're going to talk about those things as part of what your strategy is. I mean, strategy is usually broad pathways. It's not specific as far as that goes. That's where, when you get to specifics, that's where you really get into the goals of what you're going to do.
Right.
But strategy is kind of broad pathway. So I've had ministries who've come up with, there was one acronym CORE that stands out to me. And if I'm trying to remember all the pieces of it, but they had outreach as part of what they were doing. They had relationships as part of what they're doing. They had education as part of what they're doing. Connection as part of what they were doing. So relationship with God is it was the R there. And so I have different organizations always come up with something different. And so don't feel like you have to be someone else when you're creating a strategy for what you're going to do. But that strategy has to be able to get you from where you are to where you're going to be. And they're just pieces you can talk about to know where the pathway is. So we're encouraging students here to invest. And ultimately for us, investing is being awkward so that others don't have to be.
Right. And I think strategy in the sense of what you're talking about is kind of, you're kind of defining the highways you're going to get on to get there. The specifics even of those strategies and how you carry those out, they're going to change through the course of your ministry as the culture changes.
Always. And strategy will change. Ultimately, at the end of the day, strategy will change may change as time goes by. So 10 years from now, you might say, you know what, that strategy was really great 10 years ago, but it's not really it's not really where we're going right now. So let's look at the strategy and see what we need to change in order to be maybe even timely so that it's contemporary with the language that's being used in society. I mean, at the end of the day, we don't know 10 years ago nobody was talking about this.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I mean, so This conversation wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. So the idea that youth ministries needed a strategy and they needed some broad pathways it would have been laughable, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so now when we're talking about it on a podcast.
Right. Well, you have to be able to reach the culture where they are.
Exactly. And so those things will change. And I think vision will change over time. Mission shouldn't be changing over time. If you're going to make a shift to it, it may just be restating the same thing, but usually mission never shifts. Vision will shift as time goes by, especially as you begin to accomplish those visions. Then you begin to look maybe to a bigger picture. Strategy, values typically don't change over time too much, except for your aspirational values might become actual values, and one of them might rise above one of your actual values. And then you may pick a couple of other aspirational values later on down the road that you want to try to make happen in your student ministry. Yeah,
that's good. So from strategy then to...
Yeah, strategy is one of those things where once you get that nailed down, you say, okay, then you take that and you make them categories. So you make your strategies categories that you're going to build goals under.
Okay.
So you're going to be building your goals underneath your strategies. How do we make sure that invest is a priority in our ministry? Well, for us, it was creating a student leadership team that was going to be in charge of welcoming students. And that's where God has met us in this process. Is I thought, okay, we can create this team and it'll be cool and kids will feel they'll feel a little more welcome. And what has actually happened has been absolutely different from that. We created a student leadership team and students feel like they're home. They feel like Pipeline, our student ministry here, they feel like Pipeline is home to them.
Well, I just had a conversation, kind of a unique opportunity this past week that kind of fell in. I was able to sit down with about 10 college students and just really ask any question I wanted. And so, Yeah, it was great. So the questions are like, where's the church failing you? What's keeping you from really getting plugged in and connected? What do you feel like churches don't know about you? What if you could say anything, like, fill in this blank. I wish my pastor or my church would know blank or understand blank about college students. And what do you feel like you need that you're not getting? And one of the big things that came out of that for me was very clearly articulated by several is we want to be equipped and we want to be sent. But we're always being told about the future and we're not being challenged about the now. And man, that is so true. And even in our student ministries, youth ministries, these kids are being asked, what are you going to be when you grow up? What college are you going to go to? When you get, right. I mean, we're doing purity weekends. We're talking about marriage, family. Where is the now? How do we equip them and send them now. And, I think what you're talking about is a great example of that in a very small way, really, but is very empowering.
Absolutely. And I think, it's interesting because if we kind of take a little bit of what you just talked about and we kind of run it through the process, the mission is to make disciples of all the nations, right? Your college students get that. They know that's their mission. And if you were to say, okay, well, what's my vision in helping them get what they want? Then how would you paint a picture around making sure that students feel called, equipped, and sent?
Yeah.
In a very timely process in your ministry.
Yeah, it was awesome. And it was the cool thing about that conversation was they weren't even really a part of my church, my ministry.
Right.
I was
that's
just
really cool.
somewhere. I was really there more for just support in case something went wrong. And then they said, "Hey, we're doing small groups. Would you like to lead one?" Yes, I would. And so we talked through the questions they had, and then I said, "Hey, you're free to go if you need to get out of here, but if you want to stay, I want to use you for my selfish gain and profit." And they all stayed. And so because I wasn't their pastor, they were really honest, I feel like. And it was so good. But again, it shows us in the student ministry and youth ministry where we're failing.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're the product of what we're producing.
And I think at the end of the day, our goals. So if we're going to take strategy and we're going to turn it into goals, then our goals should be built around the needs of our students and how do we meet those needs over the next 3, 6, 12, 24 months.
Yeah, so good.
And that's ultimately what goals are. I mean, you're going to have a lot of 3-month goals. From the big picture standpoint, our goals want to be big picture items. We don't want them to be too specific into what we do. Some of them need to be very specific. But what I mean by this, I'll tell you a little bit about what we did. When we started our process, we said, as one of our goals in our strategic planning process, we said we want to plan these events. We want to plan more events over the next time frame. And we made that as one of our 3-month goals. And we had a list of about 6 or 7 3-month goals. We had 4 6-month goals, 3 year goals, and 2 2-year goals. But when we looked at it, we said we want to plan some more events over the 3 months. Well, the truth is, as a student ministry, that's what we do.
Right.
We plan events. I mean, that's a lot of what we do. So we don't want to put on our goals list. We want to put the things in our goals list that are actually going to be accomplishing the strategy and the vision. We want to be things that are pushing toward our values instead of, okay, plan more events. That's way too broad. And really, at the end of the day, I mean, in student ministry, a lot of times we do a lot of event planning, not just event planning, but we do a lot of event planning. So it's not like that's out of the norm for us. That's one that student pastors and student ministries should be doing anyway. Now, if you're not doing it, then it needs to go on your goals list. Yes,
absolutely. And again, that's not dependent on size of ministry at all.
No, it's not at all. And your goals are going to be different than my goals.
Right,
and
unique.
Now, when it comes to goals, we talk about SMART goals a lot. They need to be specific. They need to be measurable. We need to know if we're actually attaining that goal. We need to know and we need to know that it is attainable. It needs to not be unrealistic at that point in time. We need to know that we can get there. It needs to be realistic. That's the R in SMART. So specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and then timely. We need to say, okay, what kind of time frame are we going to accomplish this in? What's the date by which this needs to be done?
Yeah. Well, and I think you need easy wins in that as well.
Oh, totally.
Early and easy wins for your sake and for others.
And I think if you're talking about a 3-month goal, there's not a lot of action steps in 3 months. I mean, at the end of the day, that's going to need to get done pretty quickly.
Right.
So there's not a ton usually of action steps in a 3-month goal. But in a year goal, there need to be a lot of action steps, and those action steps need to be spread out throughout the course of the year so that by this date, we've done this much, by this date, we've done this much, by this date, we've done this much.
So start with mission.
Yep, the overall picture, the 30,000-foot picture of what exactly it is and why we exist.
Then values.
That's right, and those are kind of the sentiment of who we are. They are ultimately the culture that we're creating.
To vision.
And that's the picture of what it looks like whenever our values are fully lived out. And then
strategy.
That's the broad pathway by which we're going to get from where we are to where we want to be.
And ultimately to goals.
Those are the landmarks along the path. They are the things we want to accomplish at specific moments in order to make sure that we're getting along that pathway to where we want to be.
Man, that's so good. So good. Tons of information that you've given.
It's a great process, and I really feel like the magic in this process, the magic in the strategic planning process isn't in making a plan. It's actually making it happen.
Yeah.
And so having a plan is amazing and all the information is great. But at the end of the day, if you don't do anything, then you're going to end up in the same place you are right now.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we've got the process, and I think that's super helpful for anybody to walk through on that, right? And this is the process that you walk folks through with Creative Grid partners. Is that right?
That is, yeah. That's basically what you heard is the Creative Grid process. But what I do with my Creative Grid planning process is I come in and I take your team ultimately through that process. We do a lot of storyboarding. We do a lot of groupthink. We kind of collaborate a lot, but at the same time, we try to gain consensus on where it is that we're going. And it's a great opportunity to really work together with a team. And that's usually about an 8-hour session. A lot of times we'll do it over the course of a Friday night, Saturday morning, but it's really a time where we walk through every single one of those pieces, put all of that together, and at the end you walk away with where you're going and how you're going to get there. So that's ultimately what the strategic planning process is for me with Creative Grid. It's defining mission, talking about values, deciding which values we're gonna go after, creating a compelling picture, a vision of where we want to be, defining the strategy of how to get from here to there, and then ultimately, at the end of the day, walking away with a set of goals that we're going to accomplish over the next year and a half, 2 years.
And then is there follow-up with that, or how does that?
There's follow-up, and ultimately, everybody walks away with, what's great about it is that everybody on the team walks away with something that they're supposed to own going forward over the next year.
Yeah.
So they've got a couple of those goals that they have chosen and they're going to take ownership of. And you walk away with a one-page document that says, here's where we're going. And everyone knows what their next step is. And we do a little bit of coaching on the back end with the student pastor just to make sure that they're following up with their team and getting things done.
Yeah, that's great. And so that's creativegridpartners.com?
Yes, creativegridpartners.com.
And if they want to find you out there in the webosphere? Yeah,
the easiest way to find me, there's two easy ways to find me. One is if you go to creativegridpartners.com, you'll find all of what I do with Creative Grid. But then also if you want to follow me on Twitter, that's where I do a lot of my social media. And I am at Nate J. Turner, and that's NATEJTURNER. You know, Jody, one thing that I want to do is I want to talk about the possibility of us doing something for your listeners. Maybe what I would love to do is give away a conference call. I would love to do a Skype call or even possibly do a Google Hangout with someone who needs some help with strategy or with vision or with even creating mission. I'm not sure exactly what they would need, but what they can do is maybe comment on your post here. And if they comment on your post, you can draw one of those folks who's commented. You can draw from that list of names, and I'll give away an hour of my time and just do a little bit of a conversation with them, trying to figure out how I can help them get from where they are to where they want to be.
Man, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I know
that'd be great.
That'd be really helpful, I know, for sure, for a bunch of folks. Thank you for doing that. That's great. What about, before we go, any resources? I know you'd mentioned Sustainable Youth Ministry earlier.
Yeah, I think as far as planning goes, two that really jump out at me are first, I always recommend Sustainable Youth Ministry, and that's Mark DeVries, and that's DEVRIES. And he's out of Nashville, great guy, and he just has this. His book is phenomenal. It's a great guide for anybody who's kind of rethinking how they're doing student ministry, especially for those of you who are out there that feel like you're flying the plane and trying to build the plane at the same time. His book is really phenomenal for that. It's not so much a student ministry strategy planning book as it is just some basics that you need to have down if you're going to do youth ministry. And then the other side of that is I love and one of the men that I learned from in the strategic planning process was Aubrey Malphurs, and that's Malphurs. He has a great book called Advanced Strategic Planning.
Well, thanks for coming on, man. Such good stuff. I know a huge benefit for those listening, for sure. And thanks for giving away the Skype call or the Google Hangout there.
I'm just glad to be here, and I'm thankful for the ability to do all of this. It's really fun for me.
Cool. That's awesome, man. Well, thanks, buddy. I'll catch you later.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
What did I tell you? I mean, that was a phenomenal interview. Such good stuff there. Things I certainly wish I had and had known earlier on in my ministry. And again, for Nate to offer up his time there and do some free consulting for you and help you craft that vision and kind of help you maybe push through where you are. Maybe you've got a vision, you're just kind of stuck, and he can kind of help you through that. So here's the deal. You can go to the show notes page at thelongerhaul.com/episode 006. That's thelongerhaul.com/episode 006, and leave a comment there below the show notes on that page. And we'll give that till the end of March of 2015. So this episode is live on February 12th of 2015. So the end of March, that's about 6 weeks or so, to go and leave a comment below that. And at the end of that, Nate will come through and we'll pick who is going to be the winner of that. And man, that's a great opportunity. I hope you'll take advantage of that. Also, don't forget all of the links we mentioned, the link to Nate's site there, as well as the resources he mentioned will be on there as well. Be sure to check out thelongerhaul.com regularly for other resources and updates and blog posts there to help you along with your ministry. And again, if you're enjoying the podcast, if you're finding it helpful, please share it with somebody. Head over to iTunes, subscribe there, and leave a review. It really, really means a lot to me for you to do that. And that does it for this episode today. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you in the next episode. And until then, give them Jesus.
Thanks for listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast at www.thelongerhaul.com.